Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast. I have an awesome interview with Frank Cifaldi where we talk about a whole ton of different retro gaming stuff. And also, with all the last minute changes of last week, I forgot to thank Wes from Second Opinion Games for making me this awesome shirt. I didn't originally plan on wearing this thing in like every video I've been doing the past couple of weeks, but it looks cool. People keep talking about it, and I thought it was really awesome that he was able to send me one. So thank you so much, dude. But as always, there's the news and the Q&As, so let's just jump right into it. First up, this week is the final wave of sales for the HDRetrovision cables. They have the SNES and the Genesis, as well as the adapters for Neo Geo and Saturn. And the sale goes on at 6:59 p.m. Central Time, and that's this Saturday, July 8th. So this is the third wave of this batch of cables, and after these sell out, no telling when they'll be back in stock. I think they have to sell these and then just go through the normal motions to make the next batch, which generally takes like 6 months so far in the past. Hopefully they'll be able to speed that up, but if you were waiting on these things, definitely just do it this Saturday. Don't scalp them on eBay. There's already been a bunch of people that have been trying to make double their money, and it just, not only is it really stupid because there was other waves of sales, but it's just rude. So, you know, it's different if you legitimately don't need them anymore, but it's never the case. So don't be that guy. We'll all post it on Twitter and make fun of you guys for it. That's terrible. But for people that actually need them, this Saturday, 6:59 Central Time, you think they'd pick something easier, and July 8th. Hyperkin just released an optical mouse for the SNES as a replacement for the original ball-driven mouse. Now, if you're under 30 and watching this, computer mice used to have balls inside that rolled around, and that's how you tracked your position. When it was the only way to do it, it worked fine, but once laser and optical mice came out, it was infinitely better to use those. So being able to replace the original with a brand new one is a huge help. And there's actually a lot of games that you could use the mouse with that I never even knew existed, at least not till I got a ROM cart and was able to try them myself. But it was pretty cool, so if you already have Smoke Monster's ROM set, you could just order this thing and give it a try. Plus, there's also a million things you could do with it. I mean, even Mike Matei did that whole opening sequence using Mario Paint. So there's obviously, you know, a lot of good ways for this thing to be used. And also, I don't know how I missed this last week, because it was actually announced right before last week's podcast, and especially for having Chris from Hyperkin on, you would have thought that I would remember to put that in the news. So sorry that I'm a week late, but you can actually get it from Amazon. I believe you can pre-order it right now, and it'll ship on release date. Also, that whole thing with Hyperkin, no one thought differently, but I just wanted everybody to know that that was legit. Like, I really did do a review and tagged Chris in the review, and then he got back to me right away and said, yeah, why don't I do a review, and then an interview, and then I put that in the podcast. So that wasn't planned or anything. I didn't like cheese out and, you know, talk to Chris beforehand. That podcast interview was literally the first time we'd ever even spoken, and, you know, that one exchange was our first. So I was really happy to have him on. If I had remembered to put this in the news, I could have asked him more about the SNES mouse, but overall, I'm happy that they put out this product. I already pre-ordered one for me and one for Scott because he loves these things, and hopefully we can have a review of it up soon. Maybe I'll force Scott in front of the camera again, so because he's the one that would definitely know, be able to tell how accurate it is. So if you're a fan of the stuff, definitely check it out. There's some Game Boy interface updates. First, Extremis has updated the low latency version to add zooming via the command line, which is pretty awesome that you could zoom the low latency version. There's just no on-screen menu, so you have to actually do that through a command line, where you just put it right in one of the config files. Also, Adam Zay, aka Guzpaz, I don't know. He's Shredder, the Shredder icon on the forums. You guys know I can't pronounce shit. Sorry. He actually created his own Game Boy interface loader so that you could actually pre-program it to run anything that you'd like, including these low latency settings. So I just want to give a quick demo of how it works. Right now, I have it just running the Game Boy interface software. So I'm going to boot to Swiss. Well, I have a Swiss boot disk, which is how I boot my GameCube. And then I also have his software on an SD card, and as long as you hold down Y when it boots, you get this screen. So it's press A for the Game Boy interface, B for low latency, which is what we're going to do. So I'm just going to hit B. And then I already have it in to zoom and show something else just to demonstrate the difference so you can see it's all strangely zoomed. But once you have everything in the command line with his software, and then once you select which version you want, it just stays like that. Obviously, you have to have it on an SD card. It won't save on a CD if you happen to burn it to one. But this is pretty cool because now if you want, you could just auto boot regardless of what your settings are. And as you saw, it goes right into whatever you want it to. So no more messing with the INI files or anything. You just set it once and kind of have an auto boot solution. So I'm going to go play me some Game Boy and correct the zoom and aspect ratio that I screwed up on this picture. Prof Abrasive has just tweeted that he received PCBs of the next prototype of his Saturn ROM cart. So no release dates or pre-orders or anything like that yet, but it's just good to see him making progress because I think that's something any Saturn fan would really want to buy. I know personally I would love to pull the mod chip out of mine and use that instead, so that way I would use only my original discs on the CD-ROM tray, but boot everything through his ROM cart solution. So I hope to see this to market soon, but I understand how much work goes into these things, so I'll keep everybody updated when there's any more news, and hopefully we'll be sticking a ROM cart in the back of our Saturns within a year or so. The website Nintendo Wire has created a placeholder for SNES Classic pre-orders. So basically, you go to this one website and it'll tell you where else you could pre-order or where you could get put on a mailing list or when they come out, where they're available. So it's actually a pretty handy thing to have. I still have my reservations about it, but you know I have to get one no matter what. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing Star Fox 2. There's actually a whole bunch of speculation about what Star Fox 2 is going to be like, because people have been interviewed that worked on the original team that said the ROM that got leaked to the public was a less finished version than what was actually done in-house. And it's actually kind of funny because a lot of people have been reposting their history of Star Fox 2 and the FX chips, and I posted links down below because I found a bunch of those articles to actually be really cool, including one from the founder of Argonaut, who was the company that made the FX chip, who said that all the speculation over the years that the reason Nintendo wouldn't release FX games on Virtual Console was because of a patent dispute. But according to him, Nintendo always owned the rights, so that just wasn't the issue at all. Whatever reasons they chose to not release FX games until now, I guess only Nintendo will know, but it's just very cool that we finally get to play this. I've played it before. I bought pre-made versions of it, both on that all-in-one FX cart and on one that has the different Star Fox versions, and I really liked it. So I'm really interested to see how it's going to look on the SNES Classic. And if nothing else, I mean, if you think about it that way, $80 just for Star Fox 2 isn't the worst deal. There's a new firmware available for the NeoSD ROM carts. Those are both the Neo Geo AES and MVS ROM carts, and supposedly it adds a few more features and enhancements. My Neo Geo is actually away at the moment in the middle of a top secret project, which everybody of course will be hearing about hopefully in about a month or so. So I actually haven't had a chance to test it yet, but I do recommend that anybody that has these cards obviously should update to a newest firmware, especially on a newer product. You know, they're always ironing out bugs. And if anybody's around the Brooklyn area and wants to swing by the office with their AES, I'd love to try out the new firmware and see what happens. A hack of the NES version of Super Mario Bros. Was just released that gives it the Super Mario 3 graphics, but leaves it as the original Super Mario Bros. And I played through a bunch of levels and just thought it was really neat to see the updated graphics on the older game. Kind of like a cross between the original and the All-Stars version on the SNES. So anybody that's interested, give it a shot, and it does work on EverDrives, so you should be able to just throw it right on your ROM cart. Blizzz has just updated his tutorial that allows you to convert 480i Wii Virtual Console games to 240p. And it's not as easy as some other ROM hacks that you could do, but it's still something that anybody that sits down and just reads through the instructions could definitely do and test. Certainly not more complicated than soft modding a Wii. So there's actually a lot of games that are by default 480i only that can't be forced in any other mode. And I would really love to get an archive together of these. Maybe if you guys want to take a look at the Shmups link and see, I think we're trying to start like a spreadsheet just to get a list of all the games, and that way we only hack them once and then put them in one central repository. Maybe I'll stick something up on a file hosting website, or maybe somebody would make a ROM pack of them. But either way, I just think it's something that's important and needs to be archived, because you know, a lot of information like this tends to get lost, which is another problem I'm working on. But back to the point, you know, I definitely want things like this to be archived. So 10, 20 years from now, if you need to play like Mega Man 9, you could actually do so in 240p and enjoy it as a retro style game rather than a flickery 480i game. So anybody that knows anything about Wii soft modding at all and would like to help, maybe just go to the forum and talk about it with people, and hopefully I can get an archive of all these things up in one place for people to install on their Wiis. Pre-orders for the open source scan converter are now open to the public. I tweeted a bit prematurely last week when the orders were open just to people on the mailing list, but now anybody who wants to can pre-order one. And that's still by far my favorite way to play consoles on flat screens, or even to capture video footage. So anybody that's been waiting for one, now's your chance to jump on it. You just prepay, and then it shows up whenever it's ready, which should be about 3 months. So just to skip to the end on this one, no, there is no $1,000 RGB SCART cable. I had actually already finished recording the podcast when somebody emailed me a Reddit link when some troll said that he bought a cable for $1,000 and that myself and My Life in Gaming said it was a good cable. I hate trolls, and I hate that I'm feeding one right now by even mentioning it, but I just figured I'd want to clear it up. First and foremost, there is no $1,000 RGB SCART cable. Rachel from Retro Console Accessories just decided she was going to try something new while she was closing her store for the holiday weekend. Instead of taking the cables down, in which she would always get emails of, "Are you not selling these anymore? How come they're not up anymore? Blah, blah, blah." She figured she would just jack the prices up so high that nobody would be dumb enough to buy them, so they're kept as placeholders. So, you know, that way you could just realize, well, alright, I'll wait till they come back down. I don't know if that was the best idea or not. I totally understand where she's coming from, but no, she has never sold a cable for $1,000. The person saying the cable already shipped, but it's okay, it's worth it, is lying. The only person who has ever paid anything more for a cable was when she jacked the prices up like this. Somebody would offer like $30 for a $20 cable, and she would actually go back, correct the price to the original one, and sell it to them after she got back from, you know, after she caught back up. So I feel stupid even having to explain this to people, but I just don't want, well, I guess what often happens in these situations is the trolls get out there, somebody that doesn't really understand says, "Hey, I hear there's a $1,000 cable now," and then reasonable people go, "Oh, geez, that's kind of dumb. Who would buy a $1,000 cable?" And then that's how the rumors start. The reasonable person goes, "Hey, I hear there's really expensive cables now. What's up with that?" So I'm sorry for the long rant, but don't feed the trolls. If anybody has a Reddit account, please log in and tell this guy to fuck off, because it's just stupid and rude. And don't ever buy a cable over the normal prices. Now on to the Q&As. C. Maddie Monster is asking about a solution for scaling on modern 4K HD TVs. So this is actually something that I've discussed a lot with people, and I think many people misunderstand what I mean. I'm looking at you, Nick, from HDRetrovision. I want a 4K scaler, and I would love some of these digital-to-digital mods to be 4K outputting. And to be honest, I don't think your average person, and maybe even myself included, because I do have OCD about this stuff, I don't think your average person would actually be able to tell the difference between native 1080p and native 4K content, meaning like movies and stuff, on a 4K TV. But what you do tend to see is all TVs have scalers that are designed for movies, TV, and sports, and games are almost always an afterthought on TVs, and they kind of always have been. So when you have 1080p gaming content going through and it's being upscaled to 4K, I would be willing to bet that no TV manufacturer puts in a game mode with a perfect integer scale, because if you were to do that with TV, it would look crappy. However, with gaming, especially retro gaming, where everything's all blocky and pixelated, you could tell immediately how blurry things get. So even something as awesome as an open source scan converter, I would be willing to bet that if there was a 4K version on almost every TV, you'd actually be able to notice a difference. Not because somebody could pick out the smaller pixels, but because the TV would be doing no processing or scaling at all. It would just be taking the one-to-one image and displaying it. And I've asked Fuda about this, but it was a few months ago, so maybe there's a different answer now. But as far as I know, there is no 4K scaler for gaming at all. There's a couple of, I think DVDO has the smaller ones, but they're not really that great, and in people's testing, they haven't been that much better than the integrated scalers inside the TVs. So I'm really hoping that this is something that we start to see, I would guess, late this year, maybe 2018, because the processor technology has to catch up with it. So you don't see FPGAs that do 4K that are even remotely cheap. I think in order to make, for example, like a 4K open source scan converter today, I think the sale price would have to be like $700. So I just think when the chip technology gets a little more mature, then we'll start to see it. But if anybody has any more info, I mean, what I'm saying is based off of the last time I did some real research into this was a few months ago. Maybe I'm wrong. So if there's a new thing that I don't know about, or if I missed something, definitely post down below and let me know. But as far as I know for now, I mean, the best you could do is just put your 4K TV in game mode and hope that the TV makers put some good settings in there. Next, Mad asked, do you know where I can get a Neo Geo Pocket Color light? His post said backlight, but we talked, and he actually means any kind of light, front light, backlight. I got mine done from Thursday Customs, but I think he did mine just as a fun project. That's not a service he offers. And to be honest, I don't know anybody that does it. I mean, ideally, a backlight mod would be by far the best way to go. And I'm not really a big fan of front light mods. I mean, it's very often that it almost makes it harder to see depending on your lighting. So if anybody knows of a good solution, please post below. I would love to know either a service that does it, or if anybody's made progress on any kind of replacement screens or anything. But yeah, I'd love to hear anybody else's experience with that. Okay, up next, there's an interview with Frank Cifaldi, who anybody that's been in the retro gaming scene since before it was even retro has definitely heard his name. It's kind of funny because in talking to him and hearing his history, I'm pretty sure we've crossed paths, at least online, a whole bunch of times over the years. So it was fun to actually talk to him. I'd never directly spoken or really had any interaction with him before. I just seen all of his projects pop up, and I did follow him. So it was great to finally talk to him, and I probably could have talked for hours more, to be honest with you. The guy's just a wealth of gaming information and very easy to talk to. And it's funny, the only thing we still kind of agreed to disagree on is that whole Kotaku article about Quick the Rabbit or something. And it's kind of neat because I always like seeing different people's perspectives on things. And it's kind of funny because his perspective going into that was, basically a colleague, another journalist, wrote something that, maybe it wasn't bad, maybe it was. Doesn't really matter. It's just he totally understands from a journalist's point of view. How that article was written. And then here comes me from the opposite direction, the little fat kid that always used to try to beat up the bullies, and now I see Kotaku, the big bully, coming in and picking on some dude on a forum, so I start getting mouthy. And it's just funny because I wonder if both of us are probably not 100% correct, but it's just, I just love seeing different people's sides of the stories. But we only talk about that for a short period of time. Don't worry, we don't banter about it forever. We do talk about just a whole wide range of things, and I hope to have him back on at some point, or maybe I could be on one of his podcasts or something, because it was just a whole lot of fun, and I don't know, I hope you guys like it too. This one's a very long one. I'm sure every time I do a long interview I get complaints like, oh, this is too long for me to listen to, but if you don't like listening in the car or something, maybe just pause it and write down the time and come back and finish it up later. So anyway, as always, any comments and criticism, any thoughts at all? Obviously, I went back to just the basic old Logitech webcam this week because of the disaster of using the DSLR. I didn't want to do that again. So hopefully next time I'll have a better solution. But see you guys next time, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Hey guys, I am here with Frank Cifaldi of the Video Game History Foundation. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Good. So I ask everybody this: Did I pronounce your last name right? Because I usually get
You
those
did.
wrong. All right, awesome.
Yeah. You pronounced it the way that my God, what are we, like fourth generation Italian American family does? But were we in Italy, then the proper pronunciation would be Cifaldi.
Gotcha. That's what I thought. Okay.
So when I visited Italy in my youth and learned that, I came back and just tried to sort of change my name by always pronouncing it Cifaldi. So there's like a year in like 2004 or something where if you talked to me, then it would have been Cifaldi, but I got over it.
Yeah, I have a friend growing up. The last name is Coughlin, spelled phonetically, and then they realized the Irish pronunciation is Coughlin. So,
Yeah.
10 years after I became friends with him, he started introducing himself as Coughlin. It always cracked me up. But, well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I've been hearing your name for a long time, but what really drove me to say, shit, I really got to get this guy on, is the talk that you did about the pirates saving the video games. I watched the whole thing. I loved that. That was a great talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was GDC last year, 2016. And yeah, that was after we had shipped Mega Man Legacy Collection. Yeah, thanks for watching. I actually, I'm very proud of that, and I'm not ashamed to say I'm very proud of that talk. So I'm very happy to hear that you liked it.
Yeah, you should be proud of it. And you went over a lot of things that a lot of people don't like to talk about. And when you called out Nintendo on using the ROM with the iNES header in their actual virtual console game, that was freaking awesome.
Well, I mean, okay, so like, I don't know, like I didn't mean for that to be as controversial as some people made it out to be. Like that if I recall, made some headlines on like Polygon or something, where it's like Nintendo pirated games and sold them back to you. But my only point in that talk was that the notion of emulation as a tool to run older games being considered sort of inaccurate or like inauthentic or bootleggy was born from Nintendo's stance in the late 90s on emulation being a threat. And my only point with coming back around to saying that Nintendo, in their virtual console releases for the original Wii, likely downloaded the games from the internet. My only point in saying that was that even Nintendo has come around to embracing software emulation and ROMs as a legitimate form of representing old games, and that if Nintendo has come around to that and has in fact, I would argue, led the industry in bringing back games via emulation commercially, then why is emulation still seen as a sort of second tier way of playing games? But that said, you and I are both original hardware guys. I've been rocking a PVM 2530 since like 2004.
Well done.
So, my point was not that emulation is like the best way to play old games. There will always be inherent flaws in emulation. My only point was that if we are republishing old games on modern hardware, there is no better or cheaper solution than emulation. And as an industry, because this was a talk given at an industry event, this was the Game Developers Conference, as an industry, we should be embracing emulation as a tool to bring the past back to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just to quote what you literally just said, embracing emulation as a tool is, I think that's so necessary. And it just, growing up in the late 80s, early 90s of video games, where it really hit their sweet spot of, going from the rectangle on the screen to real things, I've seen so many things almost get lost over the years. There was one game I played for was a Tandy 1000 computer with no hard drive. You had to boot from a floppy. And it was called Icon Quest for the Ring. And, you know, anybody playing it now would be like, this is terrible. It's a couple of things on the screen. But it was games like that that were the precursors to the Zeldas. And for a while, you just couldn't find it anywhere. It was gone. And then I think one of the archival websites ended up bringing it back and hosting it. So, you know, stuff like that. While I wouldn't suggest people go back and spend the 10 hours to beat that game, it's just important to have that, just like any other piece of history.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And, you know, I think that the sort of mass piracy of older video games is what has allowed them to survive in the public consciousness, frankly. Like, I can't imagine, you know, NES games on modern services, you know, selling at all, if not for emulation keeping these things alive for so long. You know, like, new fans discovered these old games via emulation. Game creators, you know, were inspired by emulation and by the scene that surrounded it, and ROM hacking and things like that. Like, I was just talking about this, you know, maybe a couple days ago. It's like Undertale, a totally amazing game, came out, I don't know, a couple years ago. It's coming out on PS4 now. Like, people love it. It's like, you know, so popular that they're making a physical console version. There's merchandise and stuff, like, and it's like the roots of that game are Toby Fox's ROM hacking Earthbound days, you know, and like the new Wonder Boy re-release, that, you know, that's from Omar Cornott. Right. Not Cornott. He's not a corn knot. He does not explore the corn. But, you know, Omar is an emulator author going back to like the 90s with Mecha. Mm-hmm. He still runs smspower.org, and it's like that Wonder Boy remake, as beautiful, as perfect as it was, like, could not have existed without that emulation scene.
Yep. Or Axiom Verge.
Sonic Mania, right? Like the new 2D Sonic game coming out, right? That's like led by Taxman, who via ROM dumps and emulation was able to reverse engineer the Sega Genesis you know, engines that ran these Sonic games, and was able to recreate a 2D Sonic game that actually feels like the old one. And it's like, you know, the sort of software emulation, you know, even my own projects, you know, Mega Man Legacy Collection, Disney Afternoon Collection, you know, that those came from a place where I and the rest of the team, you know, had been experiencing emulation and the ROM communities and even the ROM hacking communities to an extent. You know, things like our challenge mode and our boss rushes and stuff, you know, without us kind of growing up with emulators and using things like save states, like, those features just would have never existed. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of the emulation and ROM dumping scenes having been almost entirely positive, not just for fans, but the video game industry.
Yeah, agreed. So you just mentioned some of your projects. I guess, can you just go back to the beginning and kind of where you started with all this stuff? Because I've been hearing your name for a while. You know, how did you get into it? You know, what was your first thing that you worked on?
Okay, so my first sort of the roots of my involvement in just video games and like preservation go back to maybe the late 90s. Basically when I first got access to the internet and discovered emulation, and, you know, I just thought it was amazing. It still is. And, you know, this is like 1999. I'm 17, 18 years old. I'm still in high school. And so, you know, like most people that age, I think, or I don't think it was just me. When I got into something, I really got into it. You know, like I you know, if I was into a band, my life wasn't complete unless I'd heard all their deep cuts and B-sides and things, you know? Yeah. And so it was kind of the same with emulation. It's like, once I got into it, it's like, I need to know where these ROMs come from. I need to know what the extended, you know, now that I've explored the games that I read about in magazines but never played, and now that I've started sort of exploring, games that only came out in Japan now. I just really got into the notion of like what are the obscurities, what are the really rare things, and so my initial involvement in video game preservation, it's funny I say initial, but I'm still doing it, was tracking down the NES games that weren't already on the internet and putting them there.
So young, you started out with ROM dumping NES games.
Yeah.
So you must have been using that the floppy disk version, right?
No. Back when I started, CopyNES existed.
Okay.
It was the initial parallel port version of CopyNES. And actually, I don't even know if we had a unit for a while. What I was doing was tracking things down and sending them directly to Kevtris, who I know has been on your show.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the last undumped American NES retail game was the what was it? It was the Super Spike V-Ball Nintendo World Cup combo cartridge. And so I had a copy and I mailed it to Kevtris, and he reverse engineered the weird mapper on it, and that was the last one that got on there. But yeah, I would just kind of find I was always just kind of good at hunting gathering, So I sent that to Kevtris. I started seeking out. Well, it ultimately kind of spiraled into like, what about this weird stuff out of Taiwan? And so there was a company called Sachen that made and published games out of Taiwan, and they made like 64 NES games. And back then I think you could get the ROMs for like 3 of them.
I didn't realize they made that many.
Oh, there were a lot. I'm counting the multi-carts too, but a lot of multi-carts actually have unique games on them. 64, I believe. And actually, like, if you keep looking even further, it goes up a little higher, because they had like a Princess Maker clone that they didn't bother trying to sell in the US, but that's another Sachin game if you want to count it. But anyway, and also there were some studio mergers and stuff, you know what I mean? So like Joy Van made like 20, but then they became folded into such that's a whole other conversation, the history of Taiwanese NES game development that I'd love to have sometime, but I'm not really equipped for right now. But anyway, so I like discovered they were still in business, started wholesaling from them, and so that's how we got all the Taiwanese games, and that sort of spiraled into well, okay, just to backtrack for a second, it's like, I'm young and just doing this fun stuff. But I think even then I kind of realized that this is history that we're saving. This is actually important work. It's not just, we fun ROMs, let's play video games. It's like, wait, I'm actually like, helping to document something that's not just important to me, but I think historically and culturally, I should say, important. I think we could all acknowledge, even back then, that video games were an important part of us culturally, and that there wasn't really, too much of an organized effort to save it. So I started sort of thinking about, what is the most volatile, right? What is the hardest stuff to get? What games might actually disappear if not for the actions of people like me and my friends and the sort of community I was involved in at the time, and we sort of identified that NES games that were created and maybe even finished, sometimes not, but never published, were really, really in danger of disappearing, because it's like there might be a ROM in a programmer's garage, and that is the only living document of that game existing, So the first sort of major thing I did was, with that group of friends that I had been dumping ROMs with, started a website called Lost Levels in 2003, which was entirely focused on not just tracking down and digitizing these unreleased games, but hopefully also like talking to the people involved and getting the stories behind them, because I didn't like the idea of just putting a ROM like into the ROM sets and walking away and just having no context for it. You know what I mean? Like, retail games will always have context of some kind.
Yep,
usually
a box scan, a manual, some kind of thing to know that what it is you're playing and why you're playing as the character or something.
At the very least, you know how the company tried to sell it to you, right? And that is some context.
Right.
A ROM and a folder with no context just is nothing. And I just, I felt like it was, important to document what this game was and why it was and actually why it wasn't, right? Like why it didn't come out. And we did an okay job of it. I mean, frankly, we could have done better. What happened was I ended up getting a day job in video games, and that sort of got pushed to the side because that venture sort of led to my career in video game journalism.
Yeah. So where about is this? So you have you're from high school on. You're into the games. You started the website, but you go to college, and then it's the first job you get out of college video game related.
I was in college. And I quit college because of it, actually.
Oh yeah.
Well, so I started. My first like real attempts at writing articles was Lost Levels. I had done some jokey stuff before that, but that was my first like actual maybe I should try to do this attempt at writing. And I kind of caught the attention of some editors and started picking up some freelance work here and there. But in terms of when that was, I think my first paid role was in 2004. So, I had been sort of attending, night school, like community college at nights, while working at like an office day job. But on the side, I was reviewing Game Boy Advance games for Nintendo Official Magazine UK. And that was 2004. And that just kind of, spiraled from there. My first like proper job was the end of 2005. I got hired on as one of the, I believe it was 3 at the time, editors of GamaSutra.com. And GamaSutra is sort of a B2B, a business-to-business publication for people who make video games. So it's like, news that is relevant to game developers. So things like, updates to tools or new products that could help, or tutorials from other developers who are sort of sharing their knowledge with the rest of the development community. At least that's that's sort of the philosophy behind it. And we kind of grew it from there into like leaning a little more consumer friendly news focus, which I think was a good call. Kind of grew with that. But anyway, so that was my first like real job in video games, like salary job. I did that. I'll go through the rest real quick because just to get us where
No, I mean, this is interesting because, I think we're the same age, and I think our paths must have crossed as well as anybody else that's our age. We've probably been on the same forums since the 90s and just not even realized it,
It's possible,
so this is kind of fascinating to me because some of the things you're talking about and the dates you're talking about, I'm remembering how some of these things got popular. So, yeah, keep going.
Well,
please.
Sure. I mean, like in the late 90s and early 2000s and stuff, I was very heavily on the digital eclipse, not digital eclipse. That's the company I work for. The digital press forums. So I think you had Joe Santoli on your show.
Yep.
So I met Joe and John and Sean and all them. Classic Gaming Expo '99 was the first one I went to, because it was in Vegas and so was I. It was very fortunate. So we might have crossed paths on that community when Atari Age started up. I was posting there. I don't really remember like emulation wise too much where I was, like SMS Power, which I mentioned.
That one's been around forever. So I think everybody's been on that site at least once or twice.
Yeah, so. Totally. Yeah. And I actually, actually about where we are in my timeline in like 2005, I actually helped them to work on a retranslation of the Phantasy Star 1 ROM for their system. So like in Japan, which you probably know, it used an FM sound chip for better audio. And so the project at SMS Power was to translate the Japanese version to English so that you can play it in English with the proper audio. But in doing so, rather than using the script that Sega of America used back then, it was like, let's take this opportunity to actually go back to the source material and do it right. And so my role in it was basically like they had a direct translation, which I don't know how much you've looked into like localization, but it's a pretty involved. Yeah. So like I to your listeners and viewers, I highly recommend the Legends of Localization books from Fangamer. I think they're amazing. There's two of them right now. There's Zelda and Earthbound. They're both equally brilliant. So I was kind of like I saw screenshots of the script as it was, and it was like, I love this game. Let me help you.
Yeah. So a lot of those literal translations drive me nuts, and that's actually throughout all of history. Anytime you watch a documentary on something, but like if somebody 1,000 years from now finds this interview and it's like, oh, Frank told Bob to chill out. Why did Frank ask Bob to be cold? Like, no, you're wrong. Take it in context. Like,
exactly. But yeah, I'm sure, if we've been around emulation forums and stuff, we've probably crossed paths, assembler games here and there. The Shmups forums, I know that you post on there. I don't really post on there. I mostly lurk.
Yeah, I'm more of a lurker than anything. I do try to help when I can, but I got to budget we all do. Anybody that contributes to the community is usually neck deep in projects, so you got to budget your time as best you can. So
yeah, totally. And it's like, I don't know, like in terms of where I hung out on the internet, there's just this very large gap where, like a lot of internet weirdos, I was basically lived on the Something Awful forums. So like my DNA is kind of there in terms of internet culture. Yeah, in terms of work, I was at Gamasutra for a while. I ended up moving, and that was in San Francisco. I ended up moving to Atlanta for like a year and a half, maybe two, I forget, to work at a little thing Turner Broadcasting was doing called GameTap. And what we were doing, we were a digital games on demand service. The idea being that you paid whatever it was, I think it was $10 a month, and you had access to like 1,000 games in our catalog. And it was sort of a mixture of modern-ish PC games with emulated games. And so that was actually my first commercial emulation venture, I guess, was working there. And what I did was I was editorial manager, something like that. I don't remember my title, but like officially what I was doing was overseeing, when you browse the catalog, like the game descriptions and the instructions and stuff like that. That also sort of extended to me just being on the production team, helping to decide like what games do we actually try to go after and license, which ones that we've licensed should we put emphasis on in terms of like, okay, great, we have 20 Saturn games from Sega. Those are really hard to emulate. Which ones should we actually be like telling the emulation team to focus their energy on,
Those are all really tough questions.
Right. Or like, or like, which games do we promote to our users? You know what I mean? So it's a lot of sort of looking at the play data and being like, well, if it says Pac-Man on it, people try it no matter what. So,
right.
But if it's, but Twinkle Star Saga for the Neo Geo, it's like no one really, very few people launch it, but if they do, they play it for a long time, and we know it's awesome. So maybe we should promote Twinkle Star Saga as being a valuable game in our catalog. So it was like a lot of that sort of thing, and as it grew, a little bit of community management and stuff as we had our forums, and so I did that for a while. That didn't last just because the product didn't last. It was ahead of its time. Really was, and I think it still is. I don't know that you could launch a games on demand service with that breadth of content right now. I think maybe you could. like it's something I think about a lot. I mean, you saw my talk. Like I think, you know, I kind of said at the end that I think there is a future where we could bring all this stuff back in print and it won't be that difficult, but like someone has to step up and put in that initial investment to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did that for a while. I moved back. I kind of got back into editorial. I worked at a website called OneUp for a while, and I was I forget where I started there, but I ended up running news and features for a while, and that was cool because that was like jumping into this website that already had this amazing community of gamers, and so it was like, in a way, almost, I don't know, like my Twitter following just quadrupled in like 2 days, you know, because it's like you just have this instant built-in like fan base, and I thought that was cool. So I was there for a while, left just before they got sold to IGN, ended up actually back at Gamasutra, and then left that to pursue game development because I'd been actually like contracting with the studio called Other Ocean just as a consultant on some projects and pitches and stuff. You know, I'd known Mike Micah, who you should have on your show, for years, you know, and he ran the studio, and it was, you know, it just made sense. We both wanted to work with each other, so I went over there. So game development wise, that started, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And worked on some little things that people aren't generally aware of. Like we did a new version of Hexic that was only on Windows 8. Did a lot of sort of pitches and prototypes and you know, ironically canceled games that I worked on. I directed an iPhone, I should say iOS because iPad too, an iOS game based on the Sharknado film franchise for Majesco.
I did not know about that, but now I want to track that one down just for the hell of it.
Well, it's delisted because that happens now with games that are digital. Not because it was like terrible or anything, but because you know, the rights reverted away from Majesco, and it's, you know, the rights holders that got it. You know, it's this weird situation where it's like, well, we have a Sharknado game out there with the Majesco title screen. Like we could arrange it to where we like update the game to remove that and stuff, and like revert the rights to someone. Like,
but then now you'd have to convert it to 64-bit, or else that's going to get pulled anyway. So
right, it's like it was some of that, but it was also some of like, well, you know, the game didn't really sell at all, so like, what's that line of worth it? You know, and that line I think was very, very low. You know, so it just got delisted. Don't worry, I have it. That was actually a really fun project because it was like you got a month and a half, maybe it was 2 months or something, and like no money, go. So I think it was very much in the spirit,
reminiscent of E.T. for Atari.
Oh, sure, but like, I think it's more reminiscent of the movie. You know what I mean? So like the movie is a very low budget, just get it done and have fun with it sort of movie. And that was its charm. So that was our attempt with the game. It's like, we don't have a budget, so let's make a low budget game and be okay with that. I actually really like the game. It's not great, but like, you know, for something that you just kind of play for a day or two, it's funny and it works. And
the game doesn't have to be an epic for it to be good. You know, I love Missile Defense 3D. If I ever want to just strap on 3D glasses and blow up, you know, little crappy missiles for 5 minutes, it's not a great game, but it's fun. You know, Duck Hunt, you don't need it epic. So I love stuff like that too.
Well, I think for Sharknado in particular, and you know, I actually like to make more games like this where it's like, we were aiming for fun and addictive and whatever, and you know, like, yeah, we want people to buy the upgrades or whatever because it's a phone game, but ultimately I think it's like, it's sort of fun to play, but really the appeal of it is just kind of having it and playing it for a while once and laughing at it and moving on with your life. You know? And actually, I really like games like that. You know, I wish there were more games that you could see to completion in like an hour. You know, that cost very little money, and you just have a nice experience and move on.
Yeah, agreed.
But you know, I guess what I'm most known for is the stuff I mentioned earlier, the classic game collections. So, you know,
I think anybody new to the scene, that's probably their introduction to you, is being on that first game collection one, the Capcom one, right?
Mega Man Legacy collection.
Mega Man Legacy. Sorry, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I think most people who know me, like, you know, like the people who followed me on Twitter and stuff, I think they mostly know me from my video game preservation work, because I never really stopped doing that, or like my work in journalism and stuff like that. But yeah, I think, you know, in terms of knowing me as a game developer, yeah, the Mega Man Legacy Collection is probably the project I'm most known for, and that was something that we did for Capcom, obviously. And it was a collection of the 6 Mega Man titles for the NES, the original 8-bit ones. Not Rockboard. I wish we could have gotten Rockboard in there. So just 1 through 6. And it's our approach, and you know, this is what we went to Capcom with, and this is what excited them and basically got us to work together. You know, our approach to these games is that I don't think that a product that is basically an emulator with a ROM with no frills is a compelling product. I don't. Like, I think, you know, the notion of the virtual console, for example, I don't think $5 to play a ROM of Urban Champion or whatever, like, is a compelling buy for me and probably for a lot of other people. But Urban Champion being a part of NES Remix, that's a buy for me. That's a new way of playing that game, or that's a new way of thinking about it. I feel like the audience for just sort of random ROMs is very limited, you know, and but I feel like if you actually add value to these games and make people think about them in new ways, or experience them in new ways, or come to appreciate them more with historical context, like, I think that's enough added value that you make a really compelling product out of it. And so the approach with Digital Eclipse, and Digital Eclipse is, a lot of people might remember the name from the old days. So Digital Eclipse actually started in '92, and the very first commercial emulation that I know of was from Digital Eclipse in '94, when they did some Macintosh ports of Midway arcade games. It was like Robotron and Joust and Defender. Those were the 3. And like, that's actually the product that inspired MAME to exist and stuff like that. So we actually have like a really compelling lineage. Digital Eclipse stopped existing because it got sold off, and then the company went under, and blah, 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 blah. But Other Ocean, who I was an employee of, was founded by Andrew Eyre, the founder of Digital Eclipse. And basically, when we had this notion of bringing back old titles, but like in a compelling sort of collector's package with a lot of extras, and just really focusing on value add, that it might, you know, maybe we should bring back that as a brand. You know, not only we're bringing back the games, we're bringing back Digital Eclipse as a brand and as an idea, but reinventing it. So, you know, there's a lot of interviews from me at the time sort of talking about these as if we're doing the Criterion Collection treatment of games. I don't know that
I'm laughing because it's true, but I'm also happy that that's how you guys treated this, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we've hit Criterion's mark yet, to be honest, but you know, we've done 2. Yeah, I don't know how many films Criterion has done now.
Yeah, but I mean, the approach of it, and when you guys set out to do these games, I mean, the thing that makes the games good is the gameplay itself. You know, so obviously you have to have the same, you know, it has to look the same and feel the same. You know, you can't stick bonk in a Mario game or something like that. But how did you guys approach that? Did the emulation behind it, did you guys scrutinize over the look and feel, over the new forms of lag that you have to deal with, like both display lag and controller lag? And
there's basically nothing we can do about that.
There's nothing anybody could do about if your TV's got too much lag in it, and there's certainly nothing you could do about wireless protocols that inherently have a few milliseconds of lag. So that's an impossibility.
Wireless protocol, the USB standard, the way that the system itself runs things, the notion that your system OS and the game are both polling for input at the same time, the scaling that your TV's doing, if any, but even if it's not scaling, it's doing some kind of image processing. There's just so many layers, as you know very well. I don't need to tell you of potential input lag. It's like, that's a complaint I see pretty often about the collections we've done, and it's just, there's nothing we can really do about that, and other than, short of just educating people on what they can do to reduce it. It's like, plug your controller in, put game mode on your TV, have a TV that has a low, but like what people don't seem to understand is like, and also we should also say that an emulation or emulation-like approach also adds lag, and because, without getting too much into the nitty gritty, which frankly I don't entirely understand, we're talking in the old days, there's zero input lag because you have a completely analog device going to a completely analog device that's drawing scan lines, right? And it's like, we can know where your input is at the exact scan line that the TV is refreshing. And we don't have scan lines anymore. That's not a thing. We have frame buffers. We display the entire frame. It's not lines being drawn rapidly and going up again. It is the frame, So like, there is no solution for that on modern hardware and modern TVs. So every modern game has input lag, but you don't realize that because modern games are designed with input lag in mind. Classic games, unfortunately, were not.
The greatest comparison I have is try one of the harder levels in Shovel Knight, and then try one of the harder levels in Mega Man 2 on a flat screen. So that's did you guys have to adjust the old games for that at all? Did you try to
There wasn't really much we could do. I mean, like, if it was like one game, maybe we could have like hacked the ROMs to poll differently or something. You know what I mean? But we're talking about 6 games that have to play nice with each other because we remixed them for challenge modes and stuff. So, and also like all that effort we might have done to change polling might have done nothing. It's very possible that the game says exactly when you press the button, Mega Man shoots a blast. You know what I mean? Like, there might ultimately be, like, it might have been a waste of time. It might have only worked on one game. I don't know. We didn't choose to explore that. We chose to instead focus on the extra features, which, frankly, like, a lot of that wasn't even in the project scope that we signed up for. We just kind of wanted to do it, so we did.
That's awesome.
Like, there's a database feature in Legacy Collection that I'm really happy about, because there were releases on the PlayStation 1 of the 6 Rockman games in Japanese, where they ported the games, but they had something called a database, where they had every character from each of the games and a written description of, like, their backstory. And it's like every minor character with a tiny little backstory or a little joke about them or something. And it was only ever in Japanese, but, all that content existed, and Capcom had it and owned it, and we were able to get it. So we put in the effort to, like, rebuild that database feature, but in HD with the original, production artwork that they used and stuff instead of the sprites, and, like, we translated it into Japanese for the first time. And we added a thing just because we could, where it's like, if you're on a boss, you can press X to just auto fight the boss, which is kind of like it's almost a hidden feature. You don't notice it unless you like look down at the button prompt. So it's kind of a cool little Easter egg. And I was really thrilled because I was watching an E3 stream of Mega Man Legacy Collection 2, which we're not working on. Capcom took that one in house, but they retained that feature, which I'm just, I'm so happy about.
That's awesome. What a compliment to the work,
Right. Yeah, I love that. I mean, like, I could choose to be bummed that I'm not working on it, but instead it's just like they loved our work so much that they continued doing it, and I love that. They did the challenge.
To be able to say you're part of a team that inspired Capcom to relook at some of their own games, that's got to make you proud. So
I'm very, very happy about that. Yeah. But our approach on Legacy Collection was it's not technically emulation, but it functions basically identically to what an emulator would do. And it's, I don't know how deep in the weeds we want to get on this, but the approach is basically like at the development stage, we run the game basically through emulation the way you would, like we have an internal emulator. And what we're doing is sort of statically recompiling the game from ROM and emulator to C code that a console would understand, which gives us two advantages. The main one is that we can now say, no, we're not emulating a Nintendo game, so all lawyers are happy. That's sort of the main reason we took that approach. But the secondary benefit is stuff like the challenge mode that we made, where we now have C code in front of us that we can monitor as we're playing, so we could do things like interrupt. We could like put breakpoints in an NES game to do things like draw a portal on the screen for the challenge mode, so that when Mega Man's position intersects with the portal, we know that he's hit it and we transport him to another game. Have you seen that feature, the challenge mode?
Not personally, but I've seen it on YouTube. That was very cool.
Yeah, so just a brief description for people who haven't seen it is what we did was all 6 games basically look the same, so we thought it'd be cool to like mix them together. So we have a challenge mode where you'll be running through a little chunk for Mega Man 2 until you hit a portal that I've positioned, and then as soon as Mega Man hits the portal, we do like the typical Mega Man like flash the screen thing, like and then like transport him to Mega Man 6. It's like you're just kind of jumping, like it's like Mega Man Quantum Leap, where you're just like jumping through his past and changing the future. I don't know where the Quantum Leap metaphor ends here, but that's something we could only do because of our approach. But fundamentally, what we decided on very early on with Capcom was this more emulation-like approach rather than trying to port the games from source code. Because source code for, in assembly language for the NES, you can't really actually do much with that. You could recreate the game with the assets, but you can't like port the logic. You can, but you don't want to. Yeah. And B, it's just like a port is always going to introduce something different to the game, unless you go out of your way to port it to make it exactly frame for frame like the original game. And if you're doing that, I don't know why, because you're like the result is going to be the exact same as an emulation like approach, except it's going to cost like 10 times more. Right. So we took the emulation approach, and we agreed to that for that reason, because we very fundamentally at Digital Eclipse feel that these games should be played as they were, or we might take some liberties here and there, but it's always with artistic intent in mind. So, for example, the NES per scan line, and when I say scan line, I don't mean the cool dark lines in between lines. I mean like the 240 times that the screen draws. Right. Actual scan lines, not what we call scan lines, us video fetishists. So the NES per scan line could only display 8 sprites, and if it went over 8, they would start flickering natively in hardware. And we increased the limit of sprites per scan line in our code because we didn't feel that there was an artistic intent argument with the scanline limitations. We don't believe there's an argument that the developers of Mega Man were like, we intend for Mega Man to flash at this point when a bunch of, you know what I mean?
100% on your page. Both the AVS and the Analog NT Mini both have a feature to upgrade to 16 sprites. And there's not one reason to keep it. I mean, you could argue that the slowdown on the original NES is something that you definitely want to keep because, although it was an annoyance, it became part of how the game was played. But those sprites, hell no, they're just flashing and annoying.
Well, it's not just how it was played and how we remember and stuff like that, but I also think there's a compelling argument that that a stage designer could have placed enemies and hazards with slowdown in mind. You know what I mean? Like, there is a compelling argument that the artistic intent was that slowdown is here. Even though it is like, you know, it is basically an artifact of how the NES works. Like, I think there is a potential argument for artistic intent there. So we have no problem keeping that in, and I think that if you start trying to fix things like slowdown, first of all, it's really hard. But second of all, I think that's getting into slippery slope territory.
Yeah, now you're really changing the game. You're not fixing any quirks. You're changing the whole, not the whole thing, but you're changing the little pieces.
Right, potentially. And it's the same sort of argument with like how the video looks. It's like, were the pixel artists drawing these pixels with the color bleed and blur associated with composite or even RF output? You know what I mean? And I think if you look at something like Mega Man, you look at like, if you were to do a composite and an RGB capture of like the character select screen on Mega Man 2, you start noticing that like your eyes sort of trick you into like seeing like, I don't know, like jawbones and things on their faces because of that color bleed. Mm-hmm. And it's like, was that intentional? Is that how Mega Man is meant to be seen? Or would the artists have preferred that you see it in pure RGB? And that's something where there is no right answer. I feel like even if you rounded up every artist who worked on the game, I don't think there's a definitive answer for that.
And not only that, it might not even be about a game or a stage. So like the Sonic the Hedgehog games, the famous waterfall thing. So if you look at the waterfalls in composite, it looks like a waterfall. You look at it in RGB, it looks like little rectangles dropping. Yeah. So, I've never spoken to one of the original Sonic developers, but I would guess that they would love to see it in its absolute purest form. Oh, and by the way, fix the waterfall.
Right.
So
yeah, it's like if you were to do the director's cut of Sonic, and they had those resources, like they might be like, we should put a transparency effect here. That's what we intended. But like that is just, that could be endless. Mm-hmm. Another thing that we haven't done it in either of the projects, but another compelling, I think, much like the sprite limitation thing that we've discussed is maybe we sort of play the audio in 2 channels so that the sound channel doesn't drop when there's a sound effect. You know what I mean? Like, is that getting closer to artistic intent? Is that restoration of the source material? You know what I mean? Or is that now straying away from artistic intent? I don't think there's a solid answer for that, but
no. And
I think
once again, all the playing around I've done with it, it's definitely per game too. There's some games that I have to have all mono or it just sounds strange, and there are some where I love just separating the channels and having a little bit,
Oh yeah, I don't like the stereo thing at all, and that's not even what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more like when you're playing Mega Man, and the music's using all 5 sound channels. And when Mega Man shoots his blaster, the sound channel, whatever it is, triangle wave or whatever, that plays his sound, that plays the blaster sound, like that part of the song drops while that sound is going and then comes back when that sound's gone. You know what I mean? Like it gets replaced. So I think there's a really compelling argument that artistic intent was that the music is not affected by sound effects. You know what I mean? So like, I think that's a case where you can make the argument, much like the sprite limitation one. But I don't think you can make that argument for graphical fidelity. I don't think you can make that argument for slowdown in spots. And also, if you start fixing the slowdowns, then you get into really weird, risky territory where you start affecting enemy behavior and stuff because they rely on, you know, the V blank and frame counter or whatever. I'm sounding like an idiot probably, but you know, like things can get really messy if you start fixing that stuff. So, our philosophy on it, and this is not, we're not speaking for any of our clients or anything when I say this, but our philosophy is that it's not worth it to try to like fix that stuff up when we can get the games running perfectly exactly as they were. So, you know, warts and all. And I feel very strongly that you have to, at a base level, if you're, especially for the kind of products we do, which are like celebratory collector's edition sort of things. Like, I think at a base minimum, the games have to run exactly as they were, period. Even if that's optional or whatever. And I think that if you're going to start improving on the games, that's more of an additional mode sort of thing and not the game, because I'm very uncomfortable with fundamentally changing a game, even if it's something as innocuous as like fixing slowdown or whatever. I'm just very uncomfortable with like being the gatekeeper of that, because these are works of art that we all respect, and I think they deserve that level of treatment where we respect what they were, even if it doesn't necessarily adhere to modern standards. And I know I'm just sounding like a preachy, like retro games are blah blah blah, but like I just feel that as a medium, we need to respect games in that way, even if they don't necessarily match our modern aesthetic.
Yeah, I don't think you sounded preachy at all. I mean, I think the whole point correct me if I'm wrong, but the point that you're trying to make is that this isn't a remake. This is, you know, you're taking the classic and putting it on a newer console, and you're trying to keep the experience. You're not gutting it, stripping it down, and remaking the levels, much like the Wonder Boy, which, you know, I always said I loved what they did, but that's a full remake. This is the point of yours was to just take that original experience and bring that to the modern consoles. So I'm on your page 100% with all of that stuff, definitely.
And the Wonder Boy remake's great because it's, I mean, I don't know, it challenges my feelings on this subject. Also, the Wonder Boy remake, because you can play it with like retro graphics and retro audio, and it looks and sounds exactly as the Master System would play that game, except that it's drawing in the borders. You know what I mean? Like it's 16:9 and it's 60 FPS as opposed to 30.
Yeah.
But it works. It's better. You know what I mean? Like there is no reason to ever play it on the Master System again. Because
I agree 100%.
But you know, you can't. Also, Omar spent like 2 years on that one game. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like that is not an attainable goal, and I think.
Yeah, for a 6-game compilation, hell no.
Right. Yeah, sure, exactly. Like, and it's like we could make that effort for some games, and I'm not like defending our practices or whatever when I say that, but it's like, I think there is a place for it. Like I said, it's challenging my own beliefs playing Wonder Boy.
I think there's a place for both, and I think clearly the public's proven that that's the truth because both games sold. So
right, but what's challenging my beliefs is like, you know, based on the things that I say about these games and how they should be presented, it's like, well, by my argument, you should be able to have the frame rate in the Wonder Boy remake. You know what I mean? You should have a 30 FPS mode by what I'm saying, but I don't actually believe that. You know, like I think it all comes back to artistic intent though, right? You know, it's like I don't think that the developers of Wonder Boy 3 on the Master System were like, it's 30 frames per second because we want it that way.
Right.
You know, like I think that is just a concession they had to make the game that they wanted, but I think their intent was that it runs smoothly. So I don't know. It's the conversations you could have about remastering and what you do and what you don't. I think so. Another really interesting case and it's something we haven't had the opportunity to do, but I love that it happened, is that for the recent remasters of the LucasArts point-and-click adventures. Right. So Day of the Tentacle remastered, Full Throttle remastered. I think those are the product names. Mm-hmm. In both of those cases, it's very similar to what like people have had to do to remaster television shows in HD. There haven't been too many examples of this. Like off the top of my head, it was like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Star Trek: The Next Generation, Star Trek Original, The Wire. I think they
did it with at least the first season of the X-Files too.
Oh sure, yeah.
The last crappier seasons, I think it was just a quick scan in, but at least the first two seasons, they went through painstaking efforts to get it. I think same with the Next Generation. They even redid all of the effects in its original way, but in HD and everything. So. Right,
but they kind of had to because the master of a Star Trek: The Next Generation episode is on tape. Like they mastered it onto tape. So the maximum, like if you were to take the master, this is the equivalent of the negative of this episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. 480p is the best you're going to get out of that. Maybe theoretically 5 something. I don't know what the theoretical max on a broadcast tape is, but it's less than 720p. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like a movie where you could be like, okay, this 35 millimeter film, that's a theoretical like 4K max resolution on that. It wasn't 35 millimeter film, it was tape. So in order to do the Blu-rays of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which it sounds like you know already, but for the sake of your listeners, what they had to do was get the original raw film of like the shots, and like, it's like take one with the thing, and it's like, and it's like they had to watch the tape master, and they had to get all of the shots that were done and like time it exactly and be like, was that the take that they used? They did like 5 takes of this scene. So they have to watch carefully and be like, okay, that was the take they used. I'm sure in some cases it was like, okay, they used half of that take and half of that take. So we got to splice them together. Like people had to sit there and like recreate these episodes using the original source materials. And in the case of digital effects, there are no original source materials. The source code for the digital effects isn't like on a secret server somewhere. Right. It's like they made it work. They mastered it on tape. They moved on. And so the LucasArts games were, and to an extent the games we work on and stuff, sort of a similar situation. Things were mastered for their target platform and they moved on. So the audio, because these are voice acted games now, we're in the talkie era of point and click adventures with Full Throttle and Day of the Tentacle. The audio was recorded in brilliant, perfect quality on tape and then squeezed down and compressed really hard for storage on a CD-ROM and playback on your Sound Blaster or whatever. And so to restore that audio, they had to dig out the original tapes and and it was the same sort of situation, like listening to the game, the original game, listening to the tape. It's like, which take of this line read did they use? And I believe from talking to my friends who worked on it that similar situation to film probably, where they had to like sometimes splice 2 takes together. It's like his emphasis on this word was used, from this take was used here, and like they spliced them together.
Yeah,
and
that's
the result,
an attention to detail that's just, I commend the people that can sit there and go through and do
absolutely.
that. It's like the people that mix albums. That's a whole other art form. That that's a type of musician in itself.
Totally, yeah. And I just, in the same way that very few television shows have been remastered in HD on Blu-ray, like I think that should tell you why very few games have been like remastered from their source material. It's just, like, this is a business, you know, and we have to make a product that doesn't, at the bare minimum, doesn't lose money for us, but hopefully makes enough money so that we can survive as a business and move on. And I'm not speaking, again, like, I'm not speaking for Capcom products in particular or anything like that. I'm just speaking for our company as a philosophy and what we tend to focus on. I just don't feel that it is attainable to do that for most classic games. I don't think it's attainable to even do our approach for most classic games, where we take an emulation-like approach and add a lot of extra features. And I should backtrack and say, you know, there were other extra features in Mega Man that gave it more added value that took up a lot of our time, like the bonus galleries we put in have something like 900 pieces of art that I had to manually source and sort and name and you know, get approval from Capcom, and like sometimes we had to make edits to take things out because it would have changed the ESRB rating. You know what I mean? Like that's real work, that's production. But we think that for a series like a Mega Man, and thankfully Capcom agreed with this product, that the time is better spent on that content than on like trying to fix the frame rate that the game natively ran on to begin with. You know what I mean? So like that's where our approach tends to be. But all that extra bonus stuff, like, that's very costly. I don't think that works for every game ever. I think it works for Mega Man. I think it worked for the Disney Afternoon Collection, which we did, and we did a similar approach on, where we went and tracked down all the original box art and got a lot of. It's actually really cool, the gallery, because what Capcom had in their archives, you know, it wasn't super extensive. It's not like design notes and like sketches and early builds, or, you know, it's not like this dream vault of like the day-to-day of these products. But what they did have still stored away. And by the way, it's like, don't fault Capcom for not keeping that stuff. Nobody did.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You know, but what they did keep miraculously was any piece of source material that Disney sent them back in the day. So, you know, Disney would be like, okay, Capcom's doing a DuckTales game. Here are storyboards for a couple episodes. You know, here's like some character model sheets. Here's like the official licensing guide. So, you know, Scrooge's color palette and where, you know, how his eyes are shaped and things like that. So we had all of that material, and what was really fun was there's a bonus gallery in there where I think I called it pencil to pixel, where we're able to show like some of their reference material right next to an in-game screenshot and discuss like how that was used. So like
that's really cool.
Yeah. So like if you play Rescue Rangers in that first level, there's those robot bulldogs, and those were designed by Disney for an episode of the show called Catteries Not Included. And we have the model sheet of the robot bulldogs with two poses, and it's like, oh, those are like the two sprite poses. Like they just kind of took that model sheet and redrew it in pixels, and those are the two sprites for the walking animation of the robot bulldogs, you know? So we're able to show stuff like that, and like, you know, the design of Don Carnage's little plane in like the model sheets versus his sprite in the game, and how they were able to like, and it's what we're able to show is what we're able to give you is sort of a new appreciation for the work that went into the games. You know, we're not able to get like director's commentary for these games. You know what I mean? Because it's difficult. There's a language barrier. None of those guys, maybe some of them, but few of them probably still work for Capcom. You know, we like, even if we started like actually tracking people down, then, you know, there might be weird legal ramifications where Capcom's like, no, we can't publish words from that guy because blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
Right. Like, yeah. There's always a bump in the road that makes it too hard. So we worked with what we had, which was that material, and we could start telling narratives, you know, based on that. And I think it's a pretty successful feature.
I hope I'm not getting too product pitchy. I don't get paid for sales of these games.
No, I don't get that impression at all. I get the impression that you're happy to talk about projects that you are passionate about. So
yeah, okay, good.
So those are the two main releases. The Mega Man Collection. Are you allowed to talk about what's coming next, or is that still waiting for? Yeah, I didn't think so. Figured I'd just ask anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff that we're talking about.
But there is a project planned between now and never that's going to probably see release at some point from you guys.
You should see something else from Digital Clips, yes.
Cool.
I'm not going to give you a timeline.
No, I don't want to hear a timeline. Don't want to hear any of that stuff. Just so the Video Game History Foundation. So this is something that's striking a chord with me because when I started RetroRGB, I started it as a Google Doc that I figured a handful of my friends might be able to use to reference when they wanted to play Super Nintendo, and it was my cousin Scott that said, why don't you just put it into a website? I was like, that's a stupid idea. No, 5-6 years later, here we are. But as the journey has gone on, I've started to see most significantly is the evolution of how CRTs went from, these Sony, especially the broadcast monitors, the BVMs, went from, in 2007, if you were a studio, you still had to spend $40,000-$50,000 on one. And then by 2014, 15, they're literally, they'd have to pay people to remove them, so you could get them for free just by showing up. And now they're starting to hit $1,000, $1,500, $5,000 for the 32-inch. And that's when it really struck a chord with me, is that, this stuff is going to be gone soon. Yeah. Software can last as long as the internet can, but hardware has a finite date. And if you look at things like, if you've ever been, being what I lovingly refer to myself as a stupid American, I mean, we're hundreds of years old here, whereas you go to China, you walk through the Forbidden City, and it's thousands of years old. You go to Egypt, and you start to realize, this stuff will be around, and there is a place, and there's a need to preserve all this stuff. So that's when I started realizing, both archiving the data behind it and the actual hardware is really important. So when I heard that you were working on the Video Game History Foundation, that's when I was like, shit, man, I'm so glad. So can you just, give the basics on how that started and what it's set up like, and, who else is there?
I mean, how it started was, back in the late 90s, as we discussed. I've been preserving video game history my entire adult life. It's my cause, it always has been. And any job I've had, nights and weekends I've been doing my preservation stuff, but really I've sort of steered any job I had even into the sort of historical preservation of video games, part of me. So as an editor, as a journalist, I would often write or commission, oral history pieces, things like, I wrote this weirdly, ridiculously complex article trying to figure out when Super Mario Brothers was released, that I'm still very proud of. In America, we know the Japanese release date. We don't authoritatively know the American release date, which was the point of the article. I steered my game development career from Sharknado to Mega Man. So preserving games, it's always been a part of me. As I've grown up and sort of been in the video game industry proper and have met more people, not only have I met more like-minded people like myself, but I've also just gotten involved in things like the Smithsonian Art of Video Games exhibit, for example. I was, on the advisory board for. I helped to sort of shape that in a very minor way. I'm not going to take credit for it, but I got involved with the Smithsonian exhibit. Did you hear that truck? Okay.
Oh yeah. I'm shocked we haven't heard sirens yet. So I'm in Brooklyn now. So.
Well, I'm in Oakland. There's sirens all the time. I'm in a very safe part of Oakland. There's no accidents. Oakland is a very nice place. It's not what people think it is. what was I talking about before the honking killed my brain? Oh yeah, the Smithsonian. And I got involved with the guys at the Library of Congress who were archiving video games, and sort of, unofficially, sort of working with them to figure out what they should be doing. I've known the guys at the Strong Museum of Play since like 2006, 2007, something like that, and I've sort of helped funnel donations to them, and I've advised them on things they could acquire and things like that. And it's like all of this seemed to be adding up to something. So it was actually last year that I left Other Ocean as a full-time employee to pursue starting a video game preservation focused nonprofit. And I have zero experience in the nonprofit sector. I didn't know how to do that. I still don't really know how to run a nonprofit, but I'm figuring it out as I go. But I spent most of last year just putting the pieces in place, doing the paperwork correctly, finding legal counsel, and
just didn't realize how time consuming all that stuff is.
Oh yeah, for sure. And just sort of iterating on the idea of what this foundation should be, because it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not the first person to think, hey, there should be a nonprofit dedicated to this stuff. And there are physical museums that are dedicated to the conservation and preservation of video game history and telling their stories and things like that. But I didn't, where I felt that I fit in that world, and what I felt was sort of missing was something more akin to the Film Foundation. The Film Foundation is Martin Scorsese's nonprofit. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not just his, but it's the one we associate with Martin Scorsese.
Right.
And what they do is funnel money from donors and the film industry to conservation projects that restore films from original negatives that might be damaged or whatever. And it's a really cool model. And if you go to their donate page, I'm actually super jealous of it, and I might steal it someday. They have it's almost like the Humble Bundle also, where it's you go to the Film Foundation's page and it's like, okay, here are the 8 or whatever, I don't know what the count is, but it's like, here are the 8 film restoration projects that we're currently sponsoring. And each film, it costs approximately $1 to restore one frame of that film. Which films do you want your dollars to go toward? And I think that's brilliant. But anyways, yeah, I love it. And it's anyway, so I didn't think there was the equivalent of that. I'm not interested in being a museum. I don't want to maintain a physical space. I don't want to be responsible for the conservation of physical material. That's just not my thing. That's not what I'm interested in. It's not what I'm good at. And so where I thought a new video game nonprofit would fit in would be more the solving the digital problems of video game preservation. So what the Video Game History Foundation focuses on currently, and we are, God, what is it, June? We're 3 months old, so things could change, and I'm just adapting as I go and figuring this out, but currently, where I think we fit in is the notion of building a digital library of video game history. And what that means in practicality right now is a lot of hunting, gathering, and digitizing of artifacts, and putting them in a safe place that someday we'll figure out how to make into an accessible, searchable, discoverable thing. But mostly, what we focus on is giving historians and storytellers the materials they need to tell the stories of video games. And just whatever that means is what we work toward. And I don't think that mission statement's going to change ever. So what we tend to focus on, much like Lost Levels, right back in 2003, where I'm like, what's the most volatile? What's the most in danger? What can I impact the most before I die? What I've sort of identified as our focus is on very ephemeral material. So, for example, something that a project we started was the video game media asset collection. And what that is I have been collecting and digitizing the original material that a video game publisher would have sent to the media for them to use in the coverage of their game. The reason that's important is because, you'll find all kinds of stuff on these like discs they used to send out. Like, I often find just popping a disc in and like looking at its contents, screenshots and a trailer and like information on a game that there's literally no reference to online. Like, not only has it not shipped, people don't even know that it ever existed, you know? So like stuff like that, or, that's sort of the easy understanding thing, but it's like also, I don't know, from a zip disk, I recovered very early screenshots of like the first demo of Ocarina of Time. And this is, and those screenshots, they are already online. They already were, but they were put online by websites in the 90s. And so these screenshots were crunched down to like 25% of their original size, using really bad 90s JPEG compression. Often there's like an IGN watermark on the screenshot. So it's like we're able to sort of restore this art for a game like Zelda, where, people are fascinated. We already know that people are fascinated by this game and want to sort of dig deep into what it was before it shipped and sort of put together a mental narrative of how the game was developed and what decisions were made and why things were cut, things like that. Like, you only get that stuff from this material. But beyond that, even high resolution promotional artwork that was made for these games, that was sent to the media for use in magazines or whatever, that again, they might exist in a magazine, which is like a copy of a copy that you'd scan. You know what I mean?
And then you have to deal with the scans and hope that the page was okay, and then deal with photoshopping it. Whereas if you just had the original file,
it's much cleaner, sharper. The colors are correct. There's no color correction because this is the image. And in so many of those cases, my assumption is that even the people who own the rights to these games don't have this art anymore. Like, this is lost material. So I've been focusing on that material because it was only ever sent to the media. And it was thrown away because it's, I have a drawer of them here. It's like, let me find one that it was actually legible. It's just a CDR with a case that says Virtual Fighter artwork for Sega Saturn. It's just like a crappy CDR, and it's, I haven't read this one in yet, but you would use that in your article, and then like I don't think people tended to like keep these. When I was a journalist, I didn't keep like the flash drives that people sent me with screenshots for their garbage games, like I didn't keep that stuff even as an archivist. So I did not just say Virtual Fighter for the Saturn's a garbage game. That's not. No. But where was I going with that? But that material, it's like there's no archive of that. You know what I mean? Like, people didn't save that. It's just piecemeal stuff. So like these discs that I have were the things that I took from the trash at 1UP when we were moving offices. It's just stuff that, like, because that office happens to be the same office that they always had all the way back to when Ziff bought EGM in 96, because they never had to move, this stuff was just kind of crammed into corners and things like that. So I kind of collected it and took it home. and if I hadn't done that, like, it would be in the trash. Like, it would just be gone. So we're focused on material like that. So that's our first big project. What
about actual games itself? Do you archive ROMs and software that you find? And
yeah.
And what about like PC? Do you have to? I know this isn't something to redistribute, but obviously just to hold on to. But for PC stuff, do you just archive the game? Do you have an ISO of the entire thing? Because remember, a lot of the PC CD-ROMs had extra stuff on them very often, actually.
Yeah. So the short answer for that is that we're not nearly as worried about retail games as we are about this stuff. So it is not our current focus.
Gotcha.
And, it's like, I think in those cases, like, the best use case, the best sort of easy use case is that, okay, you're talking about PC games, that's a much harder one. So I'm gonna talk about an easier one. So let's talk about PlayStation 1 games, right? It's like, No Intro as a piracy group. And I don't, maybe that's demeaning to call them a piracy group, but as a group that documents CD-ROMs, which is what they do, their standards are very high for what they consider a verified RIP, and I think if there's any like errors in the No Intro database, I don't think that my nonprofit is like less likely to have made those errors if we had done the same work. You know what I mean? Like, I think that crowdsourced work, properly documenting those retail games, the code that's on the discs, I should specify. I'm fairly comfortable with that. So, like, in my mind, yeah, you need more than that. You need the packaging. You need blah 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 blah. In my mind, it's like we have the digital archive of what's on the discs, but in terms of the rest of that stuff, yeah, there might be some future project that we take on once we've grown where we've identified that, hey, maybe scanning all of the PlayStation inserts is actually really important. We should be focusing on it. But to my mind, it's like if that physical archive of PlayStation games exists somewhere where researchers can access it, like, that's enough for me, and we can move on. So, it just kind of comes down to like practicality and what there's time for. And to my mind, a retail game, is not as likely to entirely disappear from the planet as some of the stuff that we're dealing with.
Gotcha.
So we don't focus so much on that. But PC games is a huge problem, as you know, because PlayStation games, you didn't have to crack them. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't have to alter the software to make it run. It's just a PS1 ISO is PS1 ISO. Mm-hmm. If we're relying on the piracy scene to preserve PC games, it gets very problematic because there isn't, like, there's so many problems with it. Like, if you're doing PlayStation 1, it's like we can generate a checklist of every release.
Right.
Like, if you're doing computer games, like, that's not an attainable goal. I mean, people have attempted and we've gotten really close, but it's like we're never going to know every DOS game.
Right, yeah.
Like, that's not a thing.
So what about people that have games? And this is a situation that we both were accidentally involved in a few months ago, but say somebody discovers a game that was unreleased, or they have a version that's not released, and they want to archive it for all the right reasons, and they're afraid to just dump it on a forum somewhere. I mean, is there a proper procedure? Because while on the one hand, I can't imagine any company would start suing people for wanting to preserve something. But on the other hand, if you say here's a game for free, everybody download it. There's always that very realistic fear. So is there a procedure? Do we email you guys? Is there a place to go to? Is there
we bare minimum what we started doing is, and I don't know what happens to this stuff, but we've started archiving some sensitive material into like cold storage. So we have this notion of building a library, and the hope is that like everyone can access all the material we've digitized, blah 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 blah. But like some of the more sensitive material that we've had access to, like source code for a game that someone might still be selling, things like that. We're in the process of figuring out what that sort of cold storage solution looks like. Right now, it's just like we're ingesting things onto a server that no one can access but us, and it's just there. So at bare minimum, if it's needed, that conversation about legalities can happen and we can retrieve it. You know what I mean? But I think that's a really rare case.
Well, I mean, the world's a big place. Rare in the fact that it might happen 2 or 3 times a year. So. Sure,
exactly. Yeah. But in terms of things people find and want to share, like, I think you could have like the legal argument, but I think it really comes down to common sense. Should you leak the Star Fox source code? No. You don't leak the Star Fox source code.
Good point.
Blizzard is still in business selling StarCraft. There are competitive StarCraft players that like make money that potentially could cheat using this. Like the people make games that are very much like StarCraft still, and being able to access the actual source of StarCraft could give them a competitive advantage they didn't have before. You know what I mean? So like there's some common sense stuff. Like that's a really easy line. I think there are challenging lines as you get as you go backwards a little bit. Like, I don't know, if you find like a dev kit for the original Xbox and it has an unfinished build of a popular video game on it, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what the answer to that is, other than, for us at least, like help us like put it somewhere in case your house burns down, but I think that, really old stuff, I think common sense is just you put it out there. Like I think this is not the view of my company. This is a personal view. And I am echoing Jason Scott of the Internet Archive and other places when I say this. It's very hard to sue people. It is a very difficult, costly process to take someone to court.
Well, I have to jump in and correct you. It is very easy and very cheap to threaten to sue somebody.
Yes.
Which is where most of these things end for things that are very clear to you and me that, no one did any real damage, the company's not going to win anyway. In a situation like that, you'll still get that letter. And that's almost free, but you're right, actually taking somebody to court, it is a very expensive and costly process.
My perspective on this is that if we sought the legal rights to preserve video game history, then video game history would never be preserved. It's just impossible. These things are at odds. There are so many situations where you could go seek the legal rights. You could talk to the legal counsel of a game publisher, and they would not have cared otherwise. But, it's a situation where it's like, well, because you asked, no.
Right.
So like, I think there's been many situations like that. Like, I have a friend, Marcus Lindblom, who was the person who was mainly responsible for localizing the script for the original Earthbound, for Mother 2, among other games. And he wanted to write a book about localizing Earthbound. And I'm still convinced that the only reason it didn't happen is because he asked Nintendo for permission, and if he hadn't asked for permission, then Nintendo would not have cared as a company. They would not have done anything about it. That's just an example off the top of my head of where that actually happens. So I think, and this is, again, not a company stance, it's just me. I think that the logical approach to preserving things like unreleased games or things like that is that you ask forgiveness, not permission. And I think the worst that happens and again, there's a line somewhere. There's a common sense line somewhere, but for the things that are clearly on the other side of the line, like no one's ever, like, I don't know, PlayStation 1 and backwards, or like random PS2 game even. It's like, that's not a thing that anyone is making money from. You know what I mean? So I think there is a line where common sense says that if you want to share this with people, you just do it. And the worst thing that's going to happen is that you get that letter and you say, okay, and you take it down. Like, that's like, it's not like
as
you're not,
long as you're not trying to profit from it. That's,
absolutely.
I think that's the number one thing. And then, you know, common sense, just like you said, you know, if,
and again, this is not legal advice. It's common sense.
Yeah. Disclaimer. This is not legal advice. If you want legal advice, go back and listen to the one with Ryan from the video game attorney. This is not legal advice. This is speculation.
I did the count at some point. I forget where it's at, but I was, at least partially involved in getting, I believe it was a little over 30 unreleased NES games on the internet. I have never heard, since 2002 or something, I've never heard anything from anybody. Like, it's just never happened. I think there are situations where you're playing with fire for certain material, but like for older material, no one cares, you know, and it's,
yeah, that's why I think that the guy from Canada on Assembler Games, I think, you know, if I think he might have done it right, and I don't know if he contacted you or not, but if I were that person, because he was trying to protect his own identity and the identity of the people he got that game from, so he just changed a header, and if I were him, I would have done the same thing and released that to the public, and, you know, even, I mean, the first time we were talking is today, but just based on your history, and I would have just sent you an email saying, hey, this is the original unaltered, don't tell anybody where you got it, wait a year before you talk about it, like, you know, that's kind of how I would go about doing those things as well. That way, you know, the world gets it, but the original is preserved forever, and maybe one day we can go back and all have, you know, and revisit this stuff.
That was, I didn't like that situation. Are you talking about the Quick the Rabbit thing?
Yeah, and that I think the one journalist was just really looking to get as many hits as possible, and they they didn't misquote you. They out of context the shit out of you. Just, you know, and
I don't think that's fair to Heather. I think Heather's a good journalist, but you know, I think that I don't think there was any malicious intent there or anything with the piece, but I do think that I don't think the piece really took into account the other side of that, and it was unfortunate the way that went down. But yeah, that was an odd situation where it's like, I don't know. I don't personally. I think there's almost like a line somewhere, another line. I just keep creating lines here. A line somewhere where it's like, does everyone need access to this, or does this need to be theoretically accessible? You know what I mean? Like, I think that line exists somewhere. I have always been of the belief, I guess I'm pretty lucky in the sense that, like, I haven't really, you know, often by choice, had to deal with things that legally someone might care about. I mean, I have a lot of things like that. I just haven't, you know, I have like 400 review builds of, like, you know, 360 games and stuff, but you know, it's there's nothing amazing in there. Don't get excited people. But like, you know, yeah, I've encountered stuff like that, but fortunately, like, it's never had to be my focus. So I've never had to have a really difficult decision. But you know, so in that sense, like, most of the stuff I've done I've been able to take the easy way out, which is the more people that have it, the safer it is. Here it is, everyone. You know, like, I've been fortunate in that regard, but, you know, I think we need to respect that, some material can be sensitive, and that's okay. And I don't know that the Video Game History Foundation, like, I'm not going to come here and say we're the solution to this problem or anything, but, you know, that's something that we could be helpful on. And we have already, we haven't entirely established the process for the sort of cold storage thing. You know what I mean? Like, we don't entirely have that process down. We don't know what happens to the material. We don't, you know, we haven't, like, gotten to the point where we're, like, having signed things that are like, you know, this comes out when I die. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't gotten to that point yet. We haven't entirely figured it out yet. But what we are starting to do that I'm fairly confident in is just at least taking things and kind of stuffing them in the closet. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And ensuring people that no one can get that. And that, you know, if you or the rights holder or whatever, you know, like, if it needs to be accessed, then we might be able to help with it if things are cleared up or whatever. But, you know, I would say that, yeah, we're a good source for at least keeping things, you know,
locked away in a vault.
Yeah.
You have the metaphorical Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, that warehouse.
And I don't want that ever abused either. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want that to be, you know, the reason that people don't get to experience works, you know, is because, well, it's in a safe place, so my hands are, you know, I'm done here.
Right, yeah.
You know, but I think it's important to have that, you know. It's important, especially for stuff like source code. Mm-hmm. You know, we talked about StarCraft or whatever, but, you know, we have some source code that was given to us for storage that people should not generally have access to. And I think that's a very clear, like, okay, that's where this makes sense, is something like source code. But I don't know.
I think that's where it makes sense, both that it needs to be archived and that no one should ever see it except the rights holders.
Yeah. And going back to personal opinion, going back to the Quick the Rabbit thing, it's like, if the person who provided that data felt that there was information in it that would implicate him, and they were not them, I should say, I don't know who it was. Mm-hmm. If that person felt there was data in there that would implicate them as having been the person who leaked the data, and they were not comfortable with that, I think you respect that and you let it go. I don't, you know, I think they added a title screen or something to it, and it's like, yeah, as long as it's where it gets fuzzy for me. Wow, I just used the Jeff Sessions thing, the fuzzy thing. Where it gets weird for me is a situation like, I don't want to call out any games in particular because I don't think anyone was malicious here. So, okay, theoretically, someone finds an unreleased game for an older system. It is unfinished, but they feel that they can sort of patch it into, and this is, I should say, someone finds an unreleased game, has decided to sell copies of this game for profit, which is, it's whatever. It's fine. If this person decides that their product should be a better product, and then they go and like clean the game up so it's a better experience to them, like, you know, putting on a title screen like they did with Quick the Rabbit or whatever, or like, finishing an unfinished level by like moving some enemy placement and stuff like that into it, and like clean that game up and release it. And then that's the only version of the game that people can access online. That's where I get really concerned. And it's not even from a how dare you perspective. It's like, great, fix the game, fine. But it should be extremely clear that this is not the original work. Mm-hmm. And that original work should be accessible somewhere.
I've seen plenty of cases of the opposite, which makes me really happy. Here's the original untouched for history. And by the way, look at all this good stuff I fixed. So I recommend playing this version, but here's artists, final effort before it was the project was canceled.
That's the way it should be. And it's funny. I was just having this argument on Twitter earlier today because that's where you argue. So Sony at E3 announced a remake of Shadow of the Colossus. Which, by the way, I want to point out is being done by Bluepoint, which is an Austin developer, and they're amazing. Bluepoint did the PS3 remasters of Shadow and Eco, mm-hmm. and I think they did the Castlevania collection also. Not Castlevania, sorry, Silent Hill and Metal Gear. So like they're like. Last gen, they were the like PS2 to HD version studio, basically. Mm-hmm. So I actually suspect that Shadow of the Colossus is not like an actual remake. I suspect that it's using the original code base and they're just, building on top of it, which I think is going to be really cool. But anyway, I just feel like people missed that it's Bluepoint and missed making that connection. I just wanted to say that publicly somewhere. But there was a tweet from someone today with pictures of some of the colossi from like early footage of Shadow of the Colossus that didn't make it into the game. Mm-hmm. And what they tweeted was, I hope that they restore the cut colossi for this remake of it. And what I was arguing is like, no, you don't do that. Like you don't rewrite history in these games. Like, okay, maybe if you have that source material somewhere, make it accessible in the package, or if you don't, but you want to sort of make a fan version of what that might have been, then you have that as like a bonus feature, but you don't like patch things into this game because you are rewriting the work that isn't yours. You don't do that. But like for an example, for what we're talking about, I think it's crucial that there is never confusion. If 10 years from now someone downloads the ROM of Quick the Rabbit, I don't want them to assume that this is a clean version of where the project left off when it died. And so that's where I don't like altering games. I'm fine with people altering games, and I think that's the way you should do it, really, if you want people to enjoy the game. But like that original work needs to be accessible. And I have a situation now that I haven't entirely figured out that's similar to this. I have an unreleased NES game where we found one of the two chips. It's the program. So an NES game is PRGCHR typically, mm-hmm. right? It's the program and the characters being the tile graphics. I have the program chip. If I take the character chip from the Famicom version and put it where it would be in the NES prototype, the game works perfectly to the extent where it even shows the new American title screen and says by Nintendo of America on it, right? So it's like I now have a combined ROM that is very, very likely to be 100% identical to what an authentic prototype of this game would be. But I can't guarantee that. So I haven't quite figured out what do we do with that, because like no matter what, documentation wise, like this is a hack. You know what I mean? Like we pasted the Japanese ROM onto the American ROM. the matching ROM that would have went with this PRG, probably byte for byte identical to this, probably, but we don't know, and we never will know because that stash had the one chip. So like I haven't that ROM's not out yet because I haven't quite figured it out, and I don't feel a great sense of urgency either because it's exactly the same, but the title screen's different. Mm-hmm. But it gets messy, and I understand. So yeah, I mean that's our stance on that. Like our stance with older stuff. I've seen people find like an unreleased Game Boy game and then be kind of wishy-washy about releasing the ROM because it's like the legal ramifications of it, and it's like if you're waiting for the lawyer fairy to like hit his wand on you and make it okay, then that game dies.
Yeah,
like
that'll never happen.
So, like you poop or get off the pot.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, I will say though that we, the Video Game History Foundation, part of what we want to do and have started doing, but is not like a terribly advertised service of ours or anything, is consulting on situations like these. So if you have a material that you feel might be sensitive or you don't know what to do, you can contact us. If you have material that you want out there but you don't want to be associated with it, contact us. We can see what we can do, because like I'm not saying that we're going to be like, legal piracy or whatever. We're not going to like take every ROM and like release the ROM as the Video Game History Foundation, but something I'm trying to navigate is not the like legal protections of being a nonprofit, but it's like we're a library. You know what I mean? Like we are a 501c3 public charity that is a library of material. So I think there are many cases where we can ingest this material in a way that feels safe for all parties involved. And so we are, for people who have material like this, we are happy to discuss options, and there are many options, frankly. And some of those options might be, we'll take it now and figure it out later, but let's just make it safe. So yeah, I would say that to your question from like 40 minutes ago.
That's awesome, and I'm so glad there's a place like that now. So thank you for all your work, you and the whole team. And I think this is a great place to end it, because it leaves like a teaser for next time for all the follow up for everything we've talked about. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
We should plug the URL.
Well, yeah, everything, by the way, all the links to everything we're talking about is going to be in the description. But for people listening on audio only, would you plug the URL for it?
Yeah, very easy. It's gamehistory.org. That is the website of the Video Game History Foundation. We are like I said, we're a nonprofit. We are operating on public donations and almost entirely right now. And so, I'm not begging for money when I say that, but if you want to be involved, we have ways of donating. Gamehistory.org/donate. In fact, it's very easy. But I think if you believe in video game preservation and you want to be involved a little more directly in what we're doing, being part of our Patreon community is actually a really compelling way of doing that, because like at the $10 level, we have Discord access, and honestly, like that Discord is kind of becoming my soundboard for our ideas, because right now I'm the sole. Well, I haven't actually officially been hired, but like I'm the sole person working on the Video Game History Foundation full time, and so and I have board members, and they're beautiful, but like I'm working in isolation and figuring this out as I go. So when people ask how to be involved, I usually recommend being a part of our Patreon community, because it really is like a two-way street. We're figuring this out together as we go, and figuring out what like those volunteer, like I don't want to be like begging people for money. You know what I mean? Like I want people to be able to help in ways that aren't paying us money. So we're kind of figuring that out as we go. And if that sounds compelling to anyone out there, come join us. The Discord's a lot of fun. I'm there all the time. So are a lot of other people. And we're like I said, we're solving these problems as we go, because I think it's a brand new idea. I don't think there's another sort of digitally focused video game preservation nonprofit that, not to toot my own horn here, but it's very rare to have someone who's connected to the video game industry and to the collector community and to the archivist community all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a really exciting opportunity that we have. And, if this all sounds cool to you guys too, come join us.
I'm on board 100%. Well, thanks so much for all your time. You hang on, because I want to get some more email addresses from you. And everybody else, stay tuned. Any comments, put down below, and I'll see you guys next week.
Bye. Thanks.